Hi, today we're going to talk about the Lumbopelvic Hip Complex, or the thing that lets you do this. There's a lot going on in this area, and an unstable LPHC, that's what I'm going to call it from now on because it's a mouthful. An unstable LPHC and a weak core can lead to some pretty serious injuries down the road. So what is the LPHC? It is your hips, your pelvis, and your core, right? So it's kind of basically from here to your hips. There's a lot of muscles in this region. It's not just, a couple of things. There's a lot of ligaments, there's a lot of tendons, there's a lot of arteries, and there's a shit ton of nerves. So you're looking at a very complex area in the body. Why is it so complex? Well, if you think about the body as a kinetic chain, right? Your head movement can be connected to your shoulder movement, can be connected to your core, connected to your pelvis, knees, ankles. It's all connected. But if you cut your body in half, pretty much from the belly button up, and then from the end of your hips down, you're looking at the LPHC, right? You're looking at the thing that connects the upper half of your body to the lower half of your body. It's that in between that it's kind of the center for everything moving up on the top and on the bottom. So if you have an unstable LPHC, it's very likely in the long run going to hurt something else. And I'll explain why. If you have an unstable lumbopelvic hip complex, if this is all unstable and your core is weak, which typically those two things go hand in hand, what will generally happen is other muscles in your body will help to make up for that. Rather than trying to force you to strengthen the area, other muscles that are already activated will just be like, well shit, I can just activate even more. So basically what happens is other muscles in your body, specifically in your lower body, but it does happen everywhere, can happen in the upper body as well with an unstable LPHC. You have force coupling and other muscles that will make up for the weakness in other parts of your body. The erector spinae is one of these. If you have weak glutes, but you need to extend, right? You need to lift the chest and dig into the lumbar spine. If you have a weak core and weak glutes, the erector spinae, these muscles, will be like, oh well shit, I can do that. Let's just do that ourselves. But it doesn't help strengthen anything else. It just takes over for the muscles that aren't activating. So what we need to do is help to turn those muscles back on. So how do you know if you have an unstable LPHC? Typically, if your lumbopelvic hip complex is unstable, you'll have an anterior pelvic tilt. And by that I mean, if your pelvis is a soup bowl, and I hate this analogy, but it's the only one I can think of, then your pelvis, right, the soup bowl will tilt forward. So if you put your hands on your hip points, those will actually go down. See? So they go down and your tailbone actually lifts up, or your booty lifts up. So we've got this. We have a very big crunch in the back. This is called excessive lumbar lordosis. We have a weak core, tight hip flexors, right? If you look at the body like it's in a diagonal, if this is tight, the diagonal will be tight. If this is loose and stretching, this is loose and stretching. You see how there's no way that my booty could be turned on, because as soon as you squeeze your glutes, your core ignites, everything gets a little bit straighter. Other symptoms of this are tight hamstrings, tight hip flexors, and psoas. That's all connected. Hip flexor is just a catch-all word for all the muscles that help pull your legs a little bit closer to your chest or your belly. You'll have a weak core, like I said, weak glutes, and tight erector spinae in the lumbar spine. So those are your symptoms. What can this cause? Well, if you look at the lower body, and I'll put a picture here so you can see what I'm talking about. In the picture, you'll see that an anterior pelvic tilt can lead to knees knocking together, lead to the bottom half of your leg internally rotating and your feet pronating inward. So by this I mean knees knocked together. See how if my knees come together, my shins, all this will internally rotate and my feet will come closer together. So that's one thing. And if you look at it from the side, you can see it forces my back to have that excessive curve. Whereas if you pull your knees apart, you can straighten your legs, engage your core and your glutes. That's what we're looking for. So that's the anterior pelvic tilt. That is an unstable LPHC. It can go the other way. You can have a posterior pelvic tilt, but that's just not very common, so I'm not going to touch on it at all. And if you're interested, you can look it up. But you know, I've heard people say that we get this from sitting too much, but the more I research sitting, the more I'm not sure that that's fair. I think that it's sitting in chairs specifically. If you can sit on the floor, it's actually much better for you muscularly. But I'm actually going to write a blog post about that this week, so I'm not going to get too deep into that rabbit hole. What injuries are we looking at with this anterior pelvic tilt? You're looking at pretty serious ones, and I've touched on some of these before, specifically lumbar disc degeneration. So disc degeneration in the lumbar spine, hip bursitis, plantar fasciitis, IT band syndrome, which I'm not going to talk a lot about because I'm going to do a video on IT band syndrome next week. But that can cause some serious knee pain. You can also get patellofemoral pain, or runner's knee. It's pain in the front of your kneecap. Okay. An unstable LPHC doesn't only affect your lower body. It can also affect your upper body. And typically this is in a more athletic setting and in some functional movement, but in a lot of functional movements, I don't feel like you need to put a bunch of force behind a twisting motion, which is what can happen with an unstable LPHC. And by that, I mean, it's just a fancy way of saying something like throwing, right? So anything that uses your core to twist for a bunch of momentum. You would use your hips in that scenario as well, right? You twist your entire body, that's where your force comes from. But if you have an unstable LPHC, a weak core, typically what will happen is you're asking too much of your shoulder. So you get shoulder injuries this way. If you're throwing, if you're trying to throw a punch, anything that's kind of that twisting of the body to get more momentum. Chopping wood, I think, would be a pretty good functional movement, everyday movement example, that kind of thing. How do you assess if you have an anterior pelvic tilt or excessive lumbar lordosis? A good way to tell, and it's helpful if you have another person doing this to help you, just because the way that you do it by yourself can alter some results. What you'll do is you'll come up against a wall and you'll put your heels against the wall and your back against the wall and your head against the wall. You can step your feet out a little bit if you have a big booty from fat or muscle, whatever. Like me, my feet are not against the wall. So what you're going to do is engage your core and try to get your low back to touch the wall, right? And if you can do that, then you'll take your hand and you'll try to slide your fingers behind your back. And this is where it might be helpful to have someone else do this, because the more that you try to reach behind you, the more you lean away from the wall and alter the results of this assessment or experiment. So try to keep your head and shoulders and low back against the wall. Someone else or you can try to reach behind you. Now I can actually just put my whole hand under here, which is very telling. I need to do some work. Ideally, you would only be able to fit fingers behind the low back, not the whole hand. That's the assessment, right? So if you can, get a friend or partner, family member, whatever, to try to just slip their fingers underneath. But if they can slip their whole hand underneath, then you've got some work to do. And that's why we're here. So what can we do to fix this anterior pelvic tilt? Well, the first knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people, especially people doing a lot of yoga, is to try to stretch the hamstring. I'm going to stop you there. if you have excessive lumbar lordosis and you try to stretch your hamstrings first and foremost, you could exacerbate the problem rather than helping to fix it. What we need to focus on, rather than tight hamstrings, they're going to be tight probably if you have this. It's a common problem, but once you fix the other stuff, then you can start working on the hamstrings, and you might find they'll stretch anyway in doing all these other exercises. If you tighten the or you work the hamstring, it'll help get the glutes involved, and then we can work on extending the hamstring. But that's not the goal. If you have tight hamstrings and excessive lumbar lordosis, or this anterior pelvic tilt, it is a symptom, it is not the problem. Try to treat the problem rather than the symptom. So, what do we need to strengthen, and what do we need to lengthen? Great question. We need to strengthen the core and the glutes. We need to lengthen the lumbar spine and the hip flexors, right? Because that's what's tight, and remember that cross in the picture. I'm going to show you some exercises that will help with this, and it's going to start with some ab work. But the ab work specifically is a little different because we don't want to include the hip flexors, right? You don't want to tighten the hip flexors any more than they already are. We're trying to work to open them. So that makes the core exercises a little bit different. The first thing we're going to start with is a basic crunch. For your crunch, you'll come down onto your back like normal, hands behind your head, and then you'll just crunch chest to ceiling and down. Lift and lower. Lift and lower. If you have a resistance band, I've also seen people wrap a band around something heavy that isn't going to move and then strap it to their feet, and that helps you turn on your glutes and hamstrings, right? Because we're trying to strengthen that and turn off your hip flexors. It's called reciprocal inhibition. I think I've talked about it before. So if you have that, then you might be able to lift a little bit higher because your glutes and hamstrings are engaged and you're not asking too much of your hip flexors. If you don't have that, keep that basic crunch with your chest lifted up rather than forward. Next, we'll do a side plank leg lift. And there's two ways to do this, and the leg lift is very much optional. It's a compound movement. If you want to add a little bit of abductor strengthening, which we will add on later, but if you want to just do a little bit of extra, you can. You can also just hold the side plank. For all of these exercises, I recommend starting with 10 reps and do one set, take a minute or two break, and then try another set, but you're going to try to start slowly and build up because you don't want to overexert and then hurt yourself in another direction, right? You want to be able to build up to this, and then we can help address anything else you got going on. So for a side plank, like I said, you can either push down on your hand, or if you have wrist issues, come down into your forearm. You can put one leg down or in front. You can stack or stagger your feet. You're just going to hang out here. If you want to add a little something like this, you can. You can also add that leg lift. If you're holding it statically, 10 seconds. If you're lifting your leg, try to do 10 leg lifts. Totally up to you. Just rule of thumb for this set, you're going to do 10s for everything. The last ab exercise that I really want to do is a plank with serratus engagement, and it's going to be kind of hard to see, but if you start in plank, right, so your core is engaged, hip flexors aren't necessarily being opened, but they're not being strengthened either here. So your serratus are these muscles here that if they're really built up, they kind of look like extra ribs, but they're right here along your rib cage. So what you're going to want to do in your plank is, without moving your hands, drag the heels of your palms back, and that'll really help engage the core, but it also turns on the lats and serratus as well. Hold that for 10 seconds. You know the drill. All right, moving onto our backs. We're going to move into bridges or hip lifts. So again, we're on our back. Ankles are below your knees. And what we'll do here is when you lift, push down into your heels to help the glutes and hamstrings engage. Watch your knees. If you have a yoga block, you might want to put it in between your thighs just so your knees can't bang together or draw together, because that's going to exacerbate this problem. It'll hurt your knees, right? So if you can, keep everything nice and parallel, and then lower. Lift, and then lower. Go as high up as you can without arching into your low back. If you start to feel this in your low back, you've gone too far. Don't go up as high. Again, you're going to do 10 reps, 1 to 2 sets, and then you can build up from there. Next, we're going to do clamshells. So now we're really starting to engage the outer hip, the abductor, to help pull. Remember, your knees are not together potentially. So you're going to take the abductors to help open up and make parallel. So if you're a woman and you've ever done a workout video, I can almost guarantee that you've done these, but you know, they are useful. I used to think they were a joke, but they're actually very useful. So heels down, you can stay on your arm or come down onto your shoulder, whichever one feels good. You're just gonna lift and lower, lift and lower. Exhale, exhale, nice. So belly can be a little bit engaged here just to help stabilize through the low back. A lot of people tend to roll backwards when they're first doing this. Try to not roll back. If you are rolling back, and by that I mean rolling onto your right glute in my case, try not to go up as high. Another option, again, if you have a resistance band, if this just isn't doing it for you, wrap a resistance band around your thighs and lift that way. That'll help build that as well. Okay, the next one is another abduction, but this time we're gonna have straight legs. So we're down, legs are straight, toes are pointed inward, not up. There's an internal rotation of the femur. I'm gonna get way behind this dog kennel so you can see my feet. Okay, so toes are pointed down, and you're just gonna lift up and back. Just up and back. Now again, this is really easy to dig into the lumbar spine, so keep your core engaged. Up and back. Up and back. It smells like dog over here. There we go. So 10 of those per side. And again, it doesn't have to be a big movement because you're gonna start to dig into the erector spinae. We don't want that. We're trying to open the erector spinae, so keep that nice and strong and be mindful of your movements. All right, next we have fire hydrants. Again, if you're a woman and you've done any kind of workout video, I can guarantee you've done fire hydrants. Oh my God, I'm 24 minutes into this recording and my phone died and I just got the video back, so thank you, tech gods. Okay, fire hydrants. Yeah, but you're in tabletop or quadruped, and then you're just gonna lift a leg and down. Now again, this is, if you think about this in planes, right? If I was on my side, this is basically a clamshell. So it's easy to roll onto the resting leg. So notice when I lift my left leg, it's really easy to roll and open my hips into the right. So what we're gonna do to prevent that is just lift not very far, stay stable on both hands, anchored down, and then very gentle lift, lower, lift, lower. The goal is to keep the hips stable. I can't do that with one hand. Another one that I found that is a little bit more involved, and you might want to grab weights, you might not, depending on your strength. It's a modified sprinter lunge. The dynamic stretch for your hip flexor and a strengthener for the glute. So what it looks like is you've got one leg back, doozy, and one leg forward. So you're in a lunge, right? Back heel can be lifted. So you're stretching this glute, it's nice and primed and ready to be worked, and you're opening through your left hip flexor. So if you have weights in your hands, they'll be here. Lean forward, right? As far as you can go with a strong core, strong back, and then you'll just lift straight up and push onto the heel of your back foot. So again, you lower the flat back, and then you lift up with the glutes and low back, and open up through the hip flexor. I'll do the other leg so you can see that as well. So back heel, push down to all four corners of your front foot. Got your weights or not. Core engaged, flat back. Lean forward. And then push into your foot, feel your glute engage, and lift. You're opening up through this right hip flexor. A very restless dog, apparently. What's wrong? What's wrong? She's not feeling well today. Okay, we can take a break. We're back. Okay, where were we? Great. We're trying to open up the back. And I did this last because I think it would feel the best to try to open up the back last, but also I think that it will help release a lot of the glute strengthening that we've done for this exercise and that kind of stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is just cat. You're going to take out the cow if you're a yoga person. Hi, cow. So what you'll do from your tabletop is instead of taking cow, cat, you're just going to take cat. So you're just going to round through the spine, tuck your chins and tailbone down, and then come back to neutral spine, strong core, flat back. Cat, and back down. Cat, and back down. Legs are long, back is flat. Pull your knees to your chest, and release. Opposite leg to chest. Feel your back flatten against the ground, and release. What is going on? You'll do that 10 times per side. That's the end. I will see you all next week. Thank you so much. Bye.